Right, good morning everyone, and it's good to see everyone again today. We are looking at the trading position between the UK and Europe after the end of the transition period. And again, absolutely delighted that we've got Kevin Shakespeare from the Institute of Export to talk us through this. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Kevin.
Good morning, everybody, again, and it's nice to meet you again. And for those who I didn't meet the other day, it's nice to meet you for the first time. Slight apologies, there will be some slides which are similar to the other day. There are some new slides to obviously reflect the fact that we are talking around drinks and beverages. And those slides are probably more slightly at the beginning. But what I want to get across today is obviously this is being recorded, the slides are available, is the importance of beverages and the link to excise, which adds a different complexity to the webinar we held on. So it adds different complexities, and it's very, very important that businesses understand those complexities. It's easier the understanding when you're a bigger company, a larger company, you're holding goods. But if you're selling goods to small consumers, to small hotels, or distributors, or small high street stores, then the complexities are very much there. And like a lot of things in post-transition period trading, we've got used to the last 27 years of having free trade and complete trade between the European Union, of which the United Kingdom has obviously been part of, and we now have these new procedures apply. But that doesn't stop trade, and that's the important aspect. So if we have the next slide, please. Now, bearing in mind, some people are listening to this recording for the first time and are more interested in drinks and beverages than what we discussed the other day. Very quickly about the Institute of Export and International Trade, a professional membership body that are very much dedicated to all elements of international trade. That's export, import, supply chain, logistics, trading services. And again, I'm going to spend a bit more time towards the end of today talking about some of the other aspects of trade as well, in the context of post-transition period trading. So if anyone has specific questions on trading services, I will also do my best to answer them as well. With the Institute involved in membership training and qualifications, and a lot of our planning in the last couple of years has very much been to do with post-transition, whether that's companies in United Kingdom, Republic of Ireland, the rest of the European Union, and also the rest of the world in trading with both the European Union and United Kingdom. If we have the next slide, please. So the content, we're going to look at tariffs and excise, and we're going to spend some time looking at excise duties. And also we're going to spend a lot of time or some time looking at customs special procedures, which also apply to excise duties as well as customs duties. Some of the other aspects we have similarity in terms of the trade and customs journey in Incoterms. These elements in theory do not change irrespective of the nature of the product being exported. So if we have the next slide, please. So tariffs. So if we again have the next slide, please. So we started the other day by looking at tariffs, and it's important to distinguish between customs tariffs and excise duty, and we'll be doing that in the next couple of slides. But to reiterate, if there is no EU-UK trade deal, tariffs will apply. And those tariffs would apply based on what the UK has introduced, a global import tariff that will apply from the 1st of January next year. And we'll look at some examples of what the tariffs will be for excise goods shortly. So clearly tariffs have a key impact, and they have a key impact on all types of goods, including excise goods. So there needs to be a trade deal. Whereas potentially with food and agriculture, there could be tariff rate quotas. Those will probably not apply to excise goods. So the key element here is we need a trade deal between the UK and the European Union for these tariffs not to apply, so that this will have a big impact. Equally, the United Kingdom is clearly a big importer of beverages, wine from France, for example. So that in theory is not likely to stop. However, in terms of the business relationships, the additional costs of doing business through tariffs will be very much apply. If we have the next slide, please. So some examples of tariffs that would apply. This is based on the UK global import tariffs. So these tariffs would apply for goods brought in from the European Union and the rest of the world, all 164 member countries of the of the World Trade Organization. And it's probably important to look at this because if there is no trade deal between the UK and the European Union, these tariffs will apply. Now, in terms of competitor countries, if you can call it competitor countries, if you look at wine, for example, like Chile, like Australia and New Zealand, who clearly do not produce wine in anywhere near the amount of quantity as European Union countries. If there are trade deals agreed, then wine from these countries would enter duty-free, whereas they would not from the European Union. And just a point on that is that currently of the some of the bigger wine producing countries in the world, the only UK trade deal continuity it's signed is Chile currently. The UK is negotiating or trying to negotiate trade deals at the same time as the EU with the United States, with Australia and with New Zealand. Equally, the European Union is trying to negotiate trade deals with Australia and New Zealand. It is probably slightly more likely that the UK will be the first to sign trade deals before the EU, because there is a big issue around Prosecco in the EU-Australian trade deal and recognition, whereas the UK does not have that issue. So, but the most important is a trade deal with the European Union. So if we look at some examples of tariffs, we can see at the top of the slide, wines produced in Bordeaux, and you can see differences based on the alcoholic strength there. And these tariffs are fairly conformed in this top bit, whether it's Beaujolais, Bordeaux, in terms of the alcoholic content of 8.20 GBP or 10 GBP there. And we can see there wines produced in the EU, and there's obviously not including sherry, Madeira outside of this as well. So we can see some fairly substantial tariffs here, and obviously cider as well we can see. And then if we go down towards the right-hand side of the slide, we can look at specific tariffs. And in this case, I've kept the EU tariff here as well. So the third column along, we can see that this would be the tariff that the European Union would apply on goods entering the European Union. And we can see that the UK tariff is slightly lower than the European Union tariff, but still a tariff nonetheless. So signing trade deals is absolutely vital. In your case, the most important thing is the European Union. For the UK as a nation, obviously there are other countries as well, but the European Union is still the most important. Now, if we come towards the end, we can go through specific tariffs if you have specific commodity codes, and I can share my screen. So happy to do that. But I just wanted to give you some examples of tariffs. But generally, those tariffs are fairly uniform, but they are obviously a big impact in terms of the cost. And who pays those costs, as we talk about, depends on the Incoterms. But if you're selling to a small hotel, a high street store, or if you're going for a distributor, those are additional costs of doing business. And so when we go into Incoterms, we need to look very closely at that, about who controls that trade journey. If we have the next slide, please. So again, I've got don't confuse excise duty with customs duties. I'm sure in your case, you're not confused by it, but some companies do get confused by it. They think, oh, right, there's no customs duties because there's excise duty. or customs and excise duty is the same thing. They are two different elements. So if you're trading in excise duties, your company clearly needs to differentiate between customs duty and excise taxes. Excise duty is chargeable in addition to customs duty. Now, you'll probably be familiar with the UK excise duties, and you can see them noted here. Now, interestingly, the UK, like a lot of countries, tends to use excise duty as a way of raising public funds. The UK has announced recently that the budget has been cancelled due to COVID-19, but there could be emergency measures put in place in the UK, and clearly excise, like fuel, is always one area that's used, if you like, as raising public funds. But that's no different from any country. But you've got the link there. You should be familiar with what the excise duty is across wine, spirits, beer, for example. But please, you're welcome to look at that as well. But that is payable in addition. Now we're going to look at customs warehousing, because that is a potential way to defer, reduce, I wouldn't say eliminate, but to actually defer the payment of duty. So because of the and excise as well as customs duty. So all that does is help cash flow, but I guess that is important. If we have the next slide, please. So an overview of procedures, and this is an overview because we do go through it into detail. And there's a lot on this, so let's spend some time on this. Importers, so this is the UK import side, wishing to import to excise duty suspension. So I'm going to speak a lot about duty suspension today, and that's what it is. It's suspending the duty, it's not eliminating it. Have to be approved as a registered consignee or use the services of one. So a registered consignee could be a specialist freight forwarding company, a third-party logistics provider. It could be a special warehouse keeper. But that's important. But clearly, if you're delivering goods direct to a restaurant or a hotel chain or something like that, that may not apply. But certainly in excise, it's the use of warehousing and duty suspension is used even more than it is for customs, because there are additional duties applicable that have a big impact on the cash flow of the importer. So an excise movement guarantee must be in place if required for duty suspended imports to cover the movement from the port to the warehouse. So if it comes in through Dover, for example, in Kent, and moves to Birmingham, for example, then an excise movement guarantee. But again, the third-party logistics provider should be able to provide that service. So to defer payment of excise duty on imports, traders or their representatives, the freight forwarder, will need to apply for a deferment account. So when we talk about deferment, effectively it means is you're putting back the date in which you need to pay excise duty. So in the United Kingdom, traditionally that has required a deferment account, has required the support of a bank guarantee, whether that is a VAT deferment, a customs deferment, or an excise deferment. And for small businesses, getting a bank guarantee is very difficult. It's fine if you're a large business. So the ability to defer without a bank guarantee becomes harder. The UK, however, has introduced or is introducing a policy that only high-risk traders, those with a history of non-compliance or where they're not deemed financially solvent, will require guarantees. So effectively, that means there'll be more duty deferment accounts and more businesses, including the hotel chains, the distributors, the restaurants, the small local high street stores, will effectively be able to apply for deferment accounts without a guarantee. Now, the UK has taken this decision because it is outside the European Union. So the UK has taken this decision. That's not the case for trading in the European Union, where a bank guarantee is required. The UK has taken this decision, noting that there can be difficulties for businesses. So that is a little bit of a help for businesses. We'll speak about VAT separately. We're going to talk about EMCS, Excise Movement Control System, in the next slide. But there are going to be changes to how EMCS is used, but I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. And I want to speak about parcels and spend some time on parcels here as well, may be relevant. Now, the UK has introduced a number of changes, but to confirm that if you're even moving goods by parcels, Effectively the duty is being captured by the parcel operator. So this is a really key aspect to remember here. So excise duty on parcels containing excise goods will be collected by the parcel operator from the recipient in the UK. So this is a very, very important aspect to consider. So the UK trade, exports of excise to the from the EU become the same as rest of world trade. So linking with the parcel operator becomes absolutely key. So very, very important to note that aspect if you're moving parcels. So
Kevin, sorry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So if I was to receive a parcel of something that was an alcoholic drink in that came from France or Spain, and that was through DPS or any of those parcel operators, I would have to pay for that excise as the recipient. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you as an individual, the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Obviously, if you're selling to a hotel chain and distributor, that could be slightly different, but then the volumes would be higher anyway.
Yeah, but I was thinking that will even affect direct to consumer, wouldn't it? If I was buying from a website, you know, a French website for Montbazillac or something.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, but no, great question. If we have a next slide, please. So you'll probably be familiar with the excise movement control system, but let's just spend a little time considering this. And this may affect your UK customer more than yourselves potentially. So the EMCS will no longer be used to control suspended movement between the EU and the UK. However, it will still be used to control the movement of duty suspended excise goods within the UK, including the movements from the port. So EMCS, if you are going to operate under duty suspension, clearly will still apply. This will mean that immediately on importation to the UK, we'll have to place those goods into UK excise duty suspension, and you have to be authorised as a registered known consignee. Otherwise, duty will become payable immediately. If we have the next slide, please. Okay, we're going to move to the trade and customs journey now. But also think about this in the context of excise, not just customs, not just customs tariffs. Think also in the trade, in the element. So I did go over clearly some of this the other day, and I'll continue to go over it as well here. So again, to confirm, from January 2021, goods moving between the UK and the EU will move between different customs territories. Okay, said that the other day, that's absolutely correct. So currently we have one customs territory, which is the customs territory of the European Union. And the United Kingdom is still part of that customs territory during the transition period. At the end of the transition period, at 11 p.m. on the 31st of December, there will be two customs territories, one of the UK and one of the European Union. And a lot of what we're going to talk about applies to Great Britain as opposed to the UK. So Northern Ireland is part of two customs territories. It's part of the customs territory of the European Union and the United Kingdom. And we'll look at the specifics around Northern Ireland separately. So a lot of what we'll talk about will be GB. So in this instance, an outward export customs declarations would apply for leaving the European Union in this case, and inbound for entering the customs territory of the UK, but more specifically Great Britain. So responsibility for that declaration, those two declarations, depends on the Incoterms. But again, we need to think about this in terms of who the recipient is of those goods in the United Kingdom. Is it a consumer? Let's say, is it a small retail store? Is it a distributor? All those are going to have impacts here. And coming back to our consumer impact, working with the likes of DHL, as you said, DPD, UPS, FedEx, etc., are going to be absolutely key. Now, most of those are very familiar with the impacts and will be doing a lot of proofing on it. but working with them is going to be key and fundamental. But when you do deal with them, when you move goods from the European Union to Great Britain, make sure you get the copies of the declarations. That becomes absolutely key and vital. If we have a next slide, please. So again, we looked at this the other day, but I'm still going to spend some time on it, bearing in mind this is being recorded. So what is different from the goods leaving the exporter's premises in France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Netherlands, Germany, Poland, various other countries? What is different here from today? The exporter will have certain actions they need to take. Even if the parcel operator is involved. Now, export customs declarations required. No export health certificates in this case. This is not food or products of animal origin. Requirements on labelling, analysis, and goods placed on the market. This becomes important. Now, we're going to look at an example of bottled water later, but this really becomes important as well, to be very clear of the requirements. Now, the UK hasn't necessarily released all the requirements for beverages. The UK has announced the border operating model, and it does have a section on that on excise goods, but it's relatively brief. It's just 1.5 pages. But there are further information that may be announced there. But in terms of labelling becomes very important. But I guess the thing about excise is labelling is already of a high standard. Origin certificates will sort of talk about probably less of an issue here in excise, because if it's wine from France or port from Portugal, for example, it's all very clear in terms of origin and nationality. Carnets required for temporary exports. Again, is this relevant? Well, I guess if you are bringing beverages over as part of an exhibition or a wine tasting or a spirit tasting, as soon as that is consumed, it no longer becomes a temporary export. It becomes a full export. So duty, excise, and customs, if there is no trade deal, applies as soon as that is consumed. Important to specify that point there. There will continue to need to be a safety and security exit declaration from the European Union, provided by the haulier, and the packaging must be specially heat treated ISPM 15 compliant. So that packaging is done by the parcel operator or the haulier or yourselves. You need to make sure it is ISPM 15 compliant, and you have the special kite mark to indicate it's been specially heat treated. Now, this is important. I was on a webinar yesterday, and there's a big assumption that this is not going to be a problem, that everything is going to be heat treated, all the packaging. However, it's quite interesting when you speak to some companies, this is not always the case. And smaller businesses, quite understandably, wouldn't necessarily be aware of this requirement. So working with whoever is doing that packaging is going to become very, very important to make sure. If we have a later slide that reinforces this point, it applies for all trade, but obviously beverages, it's an excise goods, it's very, very important as well. So I just wanted to reinforce that point of liaising to make sure that the wooden packaging is specially heat treated. There have been stories that there will be shortages of specially heat treated pallets, or clearly there'll be increased costs for the heat treated pallets. But I just wanted to bring that out, the importance of that. If we have the next slide, please. So imports into into GB from the EU. So again, we have the same situation, but again, we need to model this based on who the recipient is. Possible import tariffs, so customs tariffs if there is no trade deal. Import customs declarations required. Okay, goods not subject to SBS check. We'll look at bottled water as an example. Compliance on labelling, compliance, origin of the goods. Import VAT payable. We're going to look at import VAT later. You need an entry safety and security declaration, again provided by the haulier or the carrier or the fast parcel operator. And the wooden packaging must be ISPM 15 compliant. So we're going to look specifically at the UK border operating model in a minute. But again, I just wanted to show and bring out the starkness of what is needed here to meet requirements. Now, in a lot of cases, I do appreciate fast parcel operator, the carrier, will be doing a lot of this, but the costs will increase because they're going to have to do this. But you need to be aware of what they're doing, that the wooden packaging is compliant, that you get a copy of the customs declaration. And I also want to think about that in the context of Incoterms as well. Should we have the next slide, please? So now we're going to talk about the UK border operating model. And this is relatively straightforward because the UK does have staged import control procedures for standard goods, but for excise goods, full import controls commence on the 1st of January. So there is no deferral of processes for excise goods. Full stop. So from the 1st of January, full customs declarations will be required, relevant tariffs must be paid, full safety and security declarations will be required. Obviously, animal products don't come into it. So we have, if you like, a full import procedures that apply from the 1st of January. Now we're going to look at bulking procedures, customs freight simplified procedures, and warehousing shortly. But the starkness of it is from the 1st of January, you cannot stage your imports into the United Kingdom because these are controlled goods of which excise are a part of. If we have a next slide, please. So I just want to speak about bottled water. I'm not sure if anyone here is involved in bottled water, but I thought I'd bring it out. And part of the reason of bringing it out is the UK has made, in the border operating model, has a specific page on bottled water. So imports of bottled water will not be subject to additional border processes from January 2021. However, they'll still be subject to customs declarations. But beyond that, not subject to. However, a variety of documentary and/or physical checks may occur throughout the import process, including after the goods have been released from the border. Checks may include taking a sample of the goods being imported and may be undertaken after the goods have been released from the border, and that may include taking a sample of the goods being imported. At the point of sale, natural mineral waters will need to carry an extra non-tariff barrier. So recognition in line with GB legislation, and that is due to be announced in October, November, which will be checked by enforcement authorities to ensure the natural mineral water is allowed to be marketed in Great Britain. So it's important that if you do have exporters of bottled water, natural mineral water, and again, happy to take questions on this or show you the page in the border operating model that talks about bottled water. And just a point on, I've referred to the UK's border operating model. There will be an update to that in the next week or early October. So important to be aware of that. Now, that might not change bottled water, it might not change excise in any way, but if it does, we'll keep you aware of what those changes would be. Another factor I think we need to consider, and it does, sorry, we have the next slide, it's going to be in one of the future slides, actually it's in this slide here, is to think about the routes. We focused a little bit the other day on this, but we need to focus more. Is what route will the goods be moving into Great Britain? We'll speak about Ireland, the island of Ireland shortly. Now, a lot of routes could come through Calais to Dover. And you may have heard on the news yesterday that there was a lot of scare stories around 7,000 trucks on the M20 in Kent being stuck. So clearly the UK has a lot of work to do on a smart freight service or a smart border service. Calais, France already has actually a very good system there. But the UK has a lot of work to do. So again, if goods are coming in through Calais to Dover, make sure you work with your freight forwarder. Some may look at different routes. Some may look at Caen or Cherbourg to Portsmouth, for example. Some might look at Santander Bilbao to Portsmouth or to Poole or to Plymouth, for example, or Zeebrugge or Rotterdam. So look at the routes there. Now, the real pressure point on routes in the UK is seen to be Dover. Eurotunnel as well, I guess obviously Channel Tunnel could have an effect there. So do look at that and do work with your third-party logistics provider if it's you that's dealing with them, just to actually check and try and make sure they have the most efficient processes in place. Clearly, it's a parcel operator, they may be using air freight to move the goods, possibly. So I just wanted to mention that. Also wanted to mention the context of the island of Ireland, and it's probably jumping a little bit what I'm going to say here, is that goods moving from the European Union to the island of Ireland move duty-free. So now that can be a number of ways, and speaking to a number of logistics providers, more and more of them are potentially going to move through the English Channel and not through the land bridge of Great Britain. For the very reason I've just said, they're very concerned about what could happen on the M20 in Kent. So therefore, goods could move from Rotterdam to Belfast. Goods could move from Rosslare to Bilbao, could move from Dublin to Zeebrugge, Cherbourg. So there is potentially, if we consider the map there, more movement which is not going to go through the land bridge of Great Britain. If it does, and you need to, if it, again, working with your third-party logistics provider, and the destination is either the Republic of Ireland or Northern Ireland, bearing in mind there are no duties, no tariffs. These effectively, the Republic of Ireland clearly is part of the European Union. Northern Ireland is part of the customs territory of the European Union. Then no duties, no tariffs apply. It's the same as it is today for you. But if they move through the land bridge, the goods need to move under a transit procedure, which means that they're not opened up in any way. The lorry goes through, for example, from Calais to Dover, through to Holyhead to Dublin. So it's very important that operates on the transit procedure. Now, your logistics provider should be well aware of that, but again, you just need to make sure when you check with them. So just wanted to bring out that important aspect there. And there are more and more routes being laid on from France, Spain, Portugal under consideration in terms of getting goods to the island of Ireland. But I just want to mention that. If we have a next slide, please. So now let's talk about Incoterms. We need to think about this in the specific context, obviously, of beverages, drinks. So as I've said before, the Incoterms determine who is responsible for the trade journey and the cost of it, the 2 customs declarations, and all the documentation that goes with it, and any tariffs and VAT, depending on the responsibility there. So when we think about Incoterms, if we can have the next slide, please, we need to think about it in terms of who is the recipient of these goods. We've talked about consumers and use of fast parcel operators, but we then need to think about, is it a distributor? Is it a GB distributor who's importing the goods? Is it yourselves or your customers and clients selling to hotel chains, to restaurant chains, direct, to high street stores that sell beverages, not necessarily the supermarket chains, but smaller retail stores? Who is the recipient, and who wants to control this process? So are you selling to somebody who has no idea what customs declarations are, what excise duty is? Do you need to take more control of that process because the other individual, let's say the person that owns a small shop or a small restaurant, effectively hasn't got any idea, and they're not set up to make customs declarations? Or are you dealing with a distributor who is more set up, who is a distributor for several brands, who will deal with the hotel chains, restaurant stores, shops, etc.? That becomes really important in this consideration. But either way, you need to work with who your customer is, who is effectively buying those goods. Now we can see here there's 11 Incoterms. In reality, and we'll see in the next slide, only a few Incoterms are used generally. But the point is there are 11 Incoterms. So it is possible to share responsibility. It doesn't have to be on one party or another. But if we have the next slide, please. Okay, so as I've talked about before, in reality, 4 Incoterms predominantly used in the European Union. And obviously the trade between the European Union and Great Britain. We have Ex Works and DDP. I'm going to start with DDP, deliver duty paid. Now, you, the European Union exporter, if it's sold under DDP, would be responsible for all elements of the trade journey, thinking about that slide, the slide we covered a slides ago, and the various boxes. You would be responsible for getting the goods to the premises of the UK buyer. Maximum responsibility. So you would be responsible for both sets of customs declarations. You would be responsible for excise duty, for tariffs, for VAT, absolutely everything. So it's a big responsibility. Equally, you may feel if you're dealing with a very small retailer who's just 1 or 2 people, that you may not feel that they're ready to take all this on. And equally, they could look elsewhere because of the additional costs of doing business. So it's a real consideration. I'm happy to take questions on this because in this sort of sector, it becomes more and more important in that we're not talking about a big multinational, a big wine producing company in France or vineyard chain selling to Sainsbury's or Tesco's, for example. We're obviously talking predominantly around smaller businesses selling to smaller businesses. So getting this right becomes absolutely fundamental, both in terms of the Incoterms, but also in terms of duty suspension, which we'll talk about shortly. Now, but even if a 3PL, third-party logistics provider, freight forwarder provides all this service to you, you as a European Union supplier, exporter, will require a UK EORI number and UK VAT number, and you would be liable to UK customs. Now, it is possible that your freight forwarder, your third-party logistics provider, can provide you with access to duty deferment accounts, to customs warehousing, which is great. They'll obviously charge you for that, but it is possible they can provide you with that service. And in many respects, for smaller businesses, that is a good position to be in, if your freight forwarder, your third-party logistics provider can provide a service. So if yourselves and your customers and your stakeholders have already been in contact with these freight forwarders, that is great news. But if not, they do need to be in contact with them now, because these freight forwarders are getting numerous inquiries through already. So you need to make sure that they are ready and able to provide the services, and not to obviously wait until the 15th of December or something, when it could be too late, when your competitors have already made inquiries and have proceeded. So this becomes absolutely fundamental, because the freight forwarders are under enormous pressure in the UK from their customers to provide services, warehousing, duty deferment, and they can only go so far because there is only so much amount of warehousing space, so much of duty deferment services they can offer. So we're not obviously talking about Heineken and things like that. We're obviously talking about smaller producers. So this becomes a key action to take now if you're going to be looking to sell on deliver duty paid. And very happy to take questions.
Yeah,
Now, if you would,
Kevin, Anthony speaking.
hi.
Thank you for it's very, very detailed. And obviously route to market selection as you're defining, freight forwarder, third party logistics provider could provide the service. So how would they go through, so say it's a small beer company, small wine company in Spain or France, how would they have reassurance that these boxes are ticked, or that in fact they need a small local importer to conduct the service?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. And if it's currently, and there's two ways of looking at that. One, there's the European exporter who's already selling.
Right.
So they'll have their existing route to market, but they do need to validate this against changes. But equally, and it's a really great point you raise, is what about if they're not selling already? They're looking to sell. So yes, in normal times, without post-transition period and Brexit, they could just consider their route to market, distributor, direct to a business. It's normally fair to say that a freight forwarder would not get involved in the sales elements. They'll just get involved in the movement of goods and obviously for additional services, sometimes the storage of goods in a warehouse for duty suspension, and possibly use of their facilities to defer tariffs and duty. They wouldn't normally get involved in saying, well, here's a distributor and things like that. So that's going to become a really difficult one. So it's easy for me to say, well, is this going to result in a lot more distributors popping up? The answer is probably yes. So more distributors are going to pop up because they can offer these import services as they get scale, as they get bigger. But distributors obviously take a margin on it. So in some cases, that may not be the best way of doing it. So the rules around your route to market, in theory, the theory of it doesn't change. It's the same as it's always been. The reality is here, though, is somebody has to take responsibility for customs duties, for excise duties and VAT. And that adds the extra layer of complexity that very small businesses, your one high street store who has two people working for them, is probably going to have great difficulty being able to do that, if that makes sense.
You know, I mean, obviously, strategically, they've got two big hurdles. One is obviously, look after local, drink local. Obviously, English wine, for example, English sparkling wine, which some French companies have ownership in. So they've got that hurdle, obviously, because we're now an independent nation, post-Brexit. And secondly, there's all these additional hoops to jump through, costs, time, and paperwork. So route to market selection and the right distributor is going to be absolutely critical.
Absolutely, yeah. And
more than ever.
Absolutely correct. I mean, it is obviously possible to use an agent, but normally an agent would more just be a commissioned sales agent who wouldn't necessarily get involved in that process. There may, however, be some agents who are prepared to be import agents. We haven't traditionally had too many of those in the United Kingdom. We had them 50, 60 years ago. Sure. But we may see some more agents cropping up who are not just negotiating the sale, finding all the restaurant chains, etc., and hotel chains. They may take if you like, become an agent for the importing as well. So that is possible that we may see see what used to happen years and years ago, where import agents there. So that's a possibility.
Yeah, they just work on a commission or whatever. I mean, some of the smaller local regional distributors, merchants, they're geared for this.
Yeah.
And obviously they've got to be more geared now because it's no longer an open market. But
Absolutely.
Thank you for responding.
No, so really, really good question. And it's really interesting is will we see not the removal of, will we see less of B2B sales to very small hotels, very small restaurants, and you're going to have this intervention. That becomes an interesting one. But if you do have small hotels, small high street stores, you still need to communicate them, obviously, and determine, will you take responsibility in that process?
Yep.
But no, really, really good question. Now,
Thanks.
The reverse of that is Ex Works, which I guess could apply, could be a distributor who does this, where you have maximum responsibility for the GB buyer, which could be a distributor, it could be a larger hotel chain, for example, where effectively the GB buyer is responsible for collecting the goods through the freight forwarder from the premises of the EU exporter. And in that case, they're responsible for everything. So it's completely flipped. They're responsible for both customs declarations, obviously they're responsible for the import tariffs, excise duties, etc. So that is there, and you may get some distributors who are prepared to do that to give themselves competitive advantage and to help the smaller EU exporter. And that's a good place to be in, potentially. And there may be some, as I say, GB buyers, distributors who are prepared to take on that extra work because they've got scale and they've got staff that can handle that. Something to consider, perhaps. Now, outside of delivered duty paid, all the other 10 Incoterms we looked at, the import duties, excise duties and VAT is paid by the GB buyer. The only exception to that is delivered duty paid. And in again, in 10 of the 11 cases, the export declaration is the responsibility of the EU exporter. Ex-Works is the only one where it's not. So if the EU exporter supplier is responsible for the customs declaration, they must have full proof of export, which means access to the customs declaration, the transport document, the airway bill, and the full trail of commercial documents. And that still applies if you're selling e-commerce. So DHL, DPD, UPS, etc., you need to make sure you have full proof of export. Now, you need that for probably VAT purposes, but you need it for audit purposes as well. So you will be liable there, or if your customs authority or VAT authorities in your EU country, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, etc., if they come and audit you and you do not have this, you could be subject to fines for not having proof of export. And this is something with EU trade, that intra-EU trade, we've not really had to have that focus on as we've had now. So I just wanted to mention the importance of having a full audit trail for every movement. Becomes vital, even e-commerce. Okay, we have the next slide. Very happy to take further questions in that regard. Now, customs declarations, and again, we talked about who's going to be responsible, but it's important, I think, to get this very, very clear now. Now, even if there's a trade deal, no customs duties, customs declarations are required. So it's really, really essential now that communications start now, if they may well have taken place already, because time is getting limited. What we don't want is a situation in December where we're having these conversations and everyone is running around trying to agree something. Just one thing I wanted to mention, in March and October last year, we had a huge amount of stockpiling in the UK. So we at the Institute did a lot with New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and we know there was a huge stockpiling of New Zealand wine. And we know that New Zealand wine, very good quality Sauvignon Blanc, is on sale in less than £5 in UK supermarkets, which is ridiculous. And it was because of the sheer level of stockpiling. So clearly for some businesses, stockpiling is a potential Brexit solution. But clearly that raises issues in terms of cash flow. You can't just send over loads of bottles of wine and store them. However, there was a lot of New Zealand wine, a lot of French wine, Portuguese, Spanish, Italian wine on sale in the UK at very low prices in the early part of this year because of the stockpiling. Now, I'm not necessarily advocating stockpiling, but certainly businesses do need to consider if you get the goods over on the 29th of December and you get the goods over on the 2nd of January, there is a huge difference in procedures. But I'm very aware that sending loads of goods over when you've not been paid for them, it's not as straightforward as that, especially for smaller suppliers. But it is something that should be considered. So just as loads of Scotch whisky is in Singapore and being stockpiled there, it is very much worth considering elements of stockpiling. But I do appreciate. Can I check from yourselves? Did you see a lot of stockpiling in March and October last year taking place?
Are you talking just UK or in Europe as well?
In Europe as well, anywhere, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
I don't recall anything over the top from what I saw here.
No, don't know.
But as I say, I'm not necessarily advocating stockpiling, but I'm just sort of making everyone aware that you say if you send things over in late December, you have business as usual. As from the 31st to 11 o'clock, 11 p.m. on the 31st December, suddenly all this changes.
Mm. The big issue, Kevin, with that, and you touched on it, which I've sold New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc for decades in the past, is, as you said, cash flow.
Yeah.
When margin and the value chain is so thin.
Yeah.
And secondly, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is a good example, or even some of the Southern France Sauvignon Blancs. They're very much made to drink now.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, that's why you'll see in the supermarket, you'll mostly see New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc only 1 year old, only recent vintage, because it's designed, it's sort of a drink now wine, like most Welsh wine, really. It should be drunk really within a year, 18 months. So it's, and as you said, cash flow as well restricts it.
And I'm certainly aware of, and not in the drinks sector, but some of the Welsh producers on the food side who are more ingredient suppliers. Yes, last year they were shipping out a lot more to Europe because their customers in Europe were stockpiling it. So they had, you know, really good sales initially, and then obviously it tailed off because that quantity was already out there. So not so much, I'm not aware of what happens on drinks, but I'm certainly aware it happens in particularly in ingredients. And then the other area where I think it happened, again, not so much on the food products themselves, but on packaging. Where a lot of packaging comes in from Europe, that people were buying in quantities of packaging ahead of the initial deadlines that we had.
Yeah, no, I think those are excellent points, but I very much appreciate cash flow is the big issue here. So yeah, just on customs declaration. So just wanted to mention a few points here. Is the commodity code, and I've said this before, becomes absolutely key. We looked at examples of commodity codes and we looked at examples of tariffs earlier. So everything is driven through the commodity code. So having that correct commodity code becomes absolutely vital. So and yes, with drinks and beverages, the commodity codes could be fairly clear, but with the alcoholic content, for example, it's very important to get the correct commodity code. Now, on a customs audit or a VAT audit, the commodity code will be looked at. So, and you will be questioned as to, can you justify why you're using that commodity code? So again, there's not really visibility at the moment between the EU and Great Britain, because there hasn't needed to be, but there will be immediate visibility after the 1st of January. So businesses need to review their commodity code. They can apply for what's called a binding tariff information, which you can apply to your customs authority, your relative customs authority, whether that's whether that's the UK, whether that's France, Germany, etc. So you can apply for that. I just wanted to mention that importance of commodity code. The customs procedure code would again, your warehouse operator, your freight forwarder probably will know this better than you. But if you are putting goods into duty suspension, you need a specific customs procedure code, and it's a different code you put in. So you need to be aware of that on the customs declaration, albeit if the freight forwarder is doing that on your behalf. Declaring correct valuation of goods and correct consignee, well, that's always important. And again, all I really want to say here is that valuation of goods will become far more visible from the 1st of January. So as soon as you put your commodity code in, the customs authorities will have a valuation checker. Now, there will clearly be bandwidth within that for valuation, and clearly in excise there's some fantastic brands which will carry a higher value to them. That's fully accepted. But what's not accepted is companies undervaluing goods. And there is an investigation in the European Union at the moment, mainly for e-commerce, that companies have been deliberately undervaluing goods to avoid duty and trying to get low value consignment relief. And the EU has now launched a major investigation into that. Obviously, COVID's held that up a bit. So e-commerce, that's happened a lot. So correct valuation of goods becomes essential, and there are valuation checkers. Clearly, if it's a luxury brand or something like that, then it's accepted as a higher valuation attached to it. But what's not accepted is someone trying to drive something worth a case of wine down from, say, £500 to £100 just to reduce the amount of VAT, customs duty and excise duty applicable to it. That clearly is against the rules. But the moment it's not too visible, it becomes very, very visible within the customs declaration and the use of commodity code. That's probably the main things there I sort of wanted to add there. We've talked about safety and security declarations, but I wanted to bring out the importance of those there. If we have the next slide, please. So commercial invoice. Commercial invoice clearly becomes the key thing against which the customs declaration is made, but it's key. Again, we haven't really had to worry about the commercial invoice because we haven't had customs declarations. But a commercial invoice becomes key. So upon customs audit or even customs declaration, you will be asked for a copy of the commercial invoice. So you need all full information on it, the Incoterms, the commodity code, the gross, the net weight. And it becomes an essential document. You need to maintain it for proof of export as well. So again, businesses need to look at what is on their commercial invoice because it will be tracked against everything. And again, it will state a valuation of the goods on those commercial invoices as well. If you like, it's almost a document of which customs come back to you and say, here's your commercial invoice. I want you to prove that everything is correct on here. If we have the next slide, please. Now, just to spend some time, I'm conscious of time. I must admit, I thought I'd get through this a bit quicker, is customs special procedures. And this again varies on how long goods are going to be stored. So we have various special procedures. The one we really want to focus on is customs warehousing. So customs warehousing, when goods are stored in a customs warehouse or an excise bonded warehouse, then effectively they are out with customs authorities. They're stored. So you do not pay customs import duty if there is no trade deal. You do not pay export duty, and you do not pay import VAT until those goods are released into free circulation. So that becomes really, really important. So it's a way of deferring the payment of duties and tariffs and VAT. It doesn't eliminate them, I'm afraid, but it does defer. If, however, you're using them to re-export, you do defer payment and you eliminate payment upon export. So could that work? Could that work for ingredients? Yes, it could. If you're bringing ingredients into United Kingdom, into Great Britain from European Union, and then you're re-exporting them to the European Union or United States, wherever, then upon re-export, you do not pay excise duty, import duty, if there is any, or import VAT. So that could be a solution. If it's just in free circulation in the United Kingdom, all you're doing is deferring the day in which you have to pay. However, for cash flow purposes, that is important, very important. So customs warehousing, excise warehousing, bonded warehouse, we're expecting to see a massive ramp up in that in trade. Again, companies need to speak to their counterparties, to their freight forwarder, to a distributor, if the distributor's handling it on their behalf, or do they need to try and take this into their own hands? But what I would say is, just as in the European Union, warehousing space in the United Kingdom or Great Britain is at a premium. In certain parts, however, and I'll leave Lynn to talk more about Wales, clearly if you're looking for something in Kent or near London or the Midlands or something, it may be more difficult and more expensive. But I'll leave Lynn to sort of speak about other parts of the UK, Wales, Scotland, if applicable. So it is important to look at that, but you need to think, well, can I go out and buy a warehouse myself or rent one? That becomes a different conversation, and do I need to work with a freight forwarder? But we expect to see a surge in excise bonded warehousing. And customs freight simplified procedures. Now, I talked about it a little bit earlier. The idea of customs freight simplified procedures is that if you, and it's another customs authorization, the freight forwarder again can do it on your behalf, or a distributor might want to do it themselves, is it's meant to expedite customs clearance, so faster customs clearance. It also means that you can make the customs declaration in the full declaration. You make an initial supplementary declaration on the 4th working day of the following month. And it also means that you can bulk declarations as well. So if you have, let's say, 50 shipments that come in of wine, of spirits, you can make one full declaration, a full declaration the 4th working day of the following month, and your costs of declarations will substantially decrease. Your freight forwarder can also do that on your behalf. So working with your freight forwarder, and clearly the bigger the freight forwarder, the more likely to have these services. That is another discussion, as well as customs warehousing is also this what's called CFSP, Customs Freight Simplified Procedures, becomes important. And again, happy to take questions on that. If we have the next slide, please. VAT. So VAT is relatively straightforward in the context of Great Britain. Is from the 1st of January next year, the UK is introducing postponed VAT accounting, which was announced in the budget. So any imports from anywhere in the world will be subject to postponed VAT accounting. So no longer do you require a VAT deferment account with UK HM Revenue and Customs. You can just postpone it. You don't need to apply for it. You just use it, and you can offset the VAT on your tax return. That obviously applies for the UK only. But again, to bear in mind, if you are selling on DDP terms, you will need a UK EORI and a UK VAT number. You will be able to use postponed VAT accounting. However, what I would say there is the UK authorities may review potential liabilities from non-UK companies. Now, at the moment, the UK does not require a fiscal representative for VAT purposes. And at the moment, there hasn't been an indication that a fiscal representative will be required from the 1st of January. However, if VAT liabilities go up and are unpaid, the UK can reserve the right to require fiscal representation with liability for that UK fiscal rep. Just to mention that. If we have a next slide, please. Northern Ireland. So speaking about Northern Ireland, we've spoken about the Republic of Ireland, the European Union. And this is perhaps more for goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, from Wales, Scotland and England, rather than the European Union. But there will be a requirement for customs declaration for goods entering Northern Ireland from Great Britain. There won't be the export customs declaration, but there will need to be an import declaration and an entry, safety and security declaration. So if any of your businesses here are involved in that, they do need to be aware of that. Excuse me, and happy to take further questions in that respect. There is a trader support service which the government have announced, the UK government, which will support businesses in making customs declarations and incurring the costs of those declarations for 2 years. So again, any companies can register for the trader support service so they can then get feedback and help and support. That's the main thing with Northern Ireland, but very happy to take questions. There is this point though about goods moving from Northern Ireland that are deemed to be at risk of moving to the Republic of Ireland, because if that's the case, the goods will be used as the goods may be subject to tariffs. There's a joint committee of the EU, the UK, and Northern Ireland, which will determine a list of at-risk goods. And I suspect excise goods will be on that at risk. Further details are due to be announced in the next 2 to 4 weeks, but also whether evidence can be provided or self-certification for goods staying in Northern Ireland. That remains to be seen. So again, further information will follow on those at-risk goods. So anyone who is involved in this, if you're listening to this recording You can register for the trader support service so you can get help, excuse me, help and support here. If we have the next slide, please. Okay, further considerations, we want to open it up. That's the ISBN 15 certified kite mark, which I indicated there. Very, very important. Again, check with your forwarder, your packing agent, if you're doing the packaging yourself. Don't assume that they'll be all immediately available from January 2021. Make sure you can advance, because if there's a shortage of these, especially heat-treated pallets, costs will go up. And what you don't want to do is miss a shipment because you can't get one. So just wanted to mention that. Next slide, please. So final considerations, I'll just spend 5 minutes on this because they're still valid here, even though it's maybe not the main purpose of today. GDPR, and this is quite an important one as well. Now, if you hold data on consumers, private individuals, currently within the EU, that's not a problem because during the transition period, we're all part of the European Union. At the end of the transition period, if you hold data, you could be in breach of GDPR. Now, there needs to be some form of mutual recognition of standards agreed between the UK and the European Union. And there should be, but we can't rely on that taking place. It is being discussed and it's quite a high level and important standard. So if you're selling e-commerce from the European Union, you hold data, name and address, telephone number, credit card details, whatever, of your UK consumer or Great GB consumer. Could you be in breach of GDPR? Technically, yes, unless there is a mutual recognition agreed. Unless you have standard contractual clauses. And again, a lot of companies will have standard contractual clauses, but are they in accordance with what should be held? So look at the Europa EU website as to what those standard contractual clauses should look like. If they don't meet the requirements, then you could be in breach. Now, is this going to matter? Well, if you've got a dissatisfied customer and they want to use this as an excuse, then yes, it could be. So let's come back to adequacy and mutual recognition of GDPR standards. In October last year, the UK said that it would recognise EU. So in other words, EU businesses holding data on UK consumers didn't have anything to worry about. The UK had that recognition, but it said to the EU, would you reciprocate? The EU said, well, yes, we'll reciprocate. However, there's a few things we want to go through. So to the best of my knowledge, that has not been agreed. So the UK could, in theory, roll back on its agreement to accept EU standards. So we do need to watch this space. There's been a number of legal cases against Amazon on this. I know we're not necessarily talking about Amazon here. Happy to take questions from Amazon if that is applicable. But do look out for GDPR because that could be something that could lurk. The other thing is trademarks. So if you hold a EU trademark, it will be cloned into a new UK trademark on the 1st of January. That, however, is not as automated a process as we would like. So you need to make sure that your UK trademark, that you are cloned over. You can apply for binding tariff, as I said. Business travel, I had this question yesterday on another webinar. I know we have COVID-19 clearly at the moment. What the situation was last October is that the European Union said to the UK that the definition of a short stay without the need for a visa would be 90 days within any 180-day period. So if you were in the European Union, you wouldn't need a visa if you were stayed with 90 days within 180 days. And the EU said, we will offer that if the UK reciprocates on the same way. Now, at the end, there was no deal at that stage. We moved then to January towards a transition period. So that needs to be discussed and put back onto the table as to what is the definition of short stay without a visa. Will it be this 90 days out of 180 days? Driving in the EU or driving in the UK, again, you do need to look up the requirements there. If you have UK nationals working in your businesses in the EU, ideally those nationals should apply for settled or pre-settled status in the EU, because from the 1st of January or possibly the 30th of June next year, that will change. And obviously product conformity is important as well. If we have the next slide, please. Okay, carnets we've discussed and the importance of carnets. Happy to take questions on that. If we have the next slide, please. Okay, so really getting towards the end now. So communicate with your customers, suppliers, and stakeholders. Your customers may be taking buying decisions now. If you're using a distributor and they're selling on to larger retailers, supermarket chains, or something like that, those buying decisions will take place now. So just because we're all in this transition period, people will be taking decisions on what it will look like from the 1st of January. So those discussions need to take place now with customers, suppliers, stakeholders, such as freight forwarders. Identify tariffs we've talked about, Incoterms, agree them, ensure the goods are insured. Now that's obvious, but I'm aware that some goods moving through Europe are not insured as much as they should be. If there are delays in the trade journey, then there could be more insurance claims. Communicate and look at the, just to confirm, the UK's low value consignment relief, £15 is being withdrawn. Import that will be payable. And work with your stakeholders. If we have the next slide, please. So again, in summary, I think this is the last slide. Acquire as much knowledge. We've talked about that. Create an action plan and communicate, communicate, communicate. A problem shared is a problem halved. And we are aware some companies are concerned that if they communicate, they're opening up difficulties and that could create problems. But if you don't communicate, people will pay. And I think Anthony made a great point, is if I'm in the UK and I'm a UK wine producer, okay, there may be a big stake or ownership by a French or a European wine producer. Well, it gives a competitive advantage there. And my UK wine producers now suddenly speaking to more, saying, well, why don't you buy English wine? It's going to be a lot better. And I know, because I live in the south of England, I live in a place called East Grinstead, and we have a huge winery here, which is doing extremely well, and lots of wineries in Kent, for example, and clearly Wales, lots and lots of wineries there. So it's very important to have that communication process, because competitors will be communicating with your customers and distributors. I think that's if we try next slide. And yeah, that's it. So I'm very happy to take questions, and thank you for listening to me.
Just wanted to say from my perspective, Kevin, it was, where am I? You want to see me? You know what I look like. Very worthwhile, really. You know, big changes ahead. I think you sum it up well. The companies exporting to UK or intending to export to UK need to gather that knowledge, you know, wide knowledge, deep knowledge of some fairly big implications and costs. And as you said, right down there, you know, the action steps really. It's very worthwhile, and you made it pretty clear. A lot of detail there, but it was fairly clear. Thank you.
No, thank you, Anthony. Thank you.
Yeah, no, just echo that again. Thank you, Kevin, for such a lot of detail, and on the webinar that we had on Tuesday. Roberto and Maëlle and Angelica, I don't know if you have any questions for Kevin now. I guess, Maëlle, you can send the recording to your vineyards.
Yes. No, thank you a lot, because it's very clear, and I think it will be very interesting for the wine producers to know all this information. So thank you.
Thank you.
In my case, I have to admit that really, so I am not an expert at all on these issues, okay? I think that you provide a lot of information that they need to digest and check also if there are different possibilities, check the one that is more optimal or more tailored for them, for sure. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we will share, of course, between the producers from this project, but also with other stakeholders that are supporting companies in our region for exporting. And really, we got a lot of interest when Linda mentioned to organize a webinar about the Brexit. Really, UK is one of the target markets for regional food companies, and we got a lot of interest from them telling, okay, try to update as much as possible. Okay, so I am really sure that they will be really happy, and the information that you have shared will be really useful. I have seen that it's really detailed and really update. So thank you for that, and thank you for the webinar, for the interesting webinar.
Thank you.
Just to let, certainly Mayal and Roberto know, I suspect in Wales we will also be asking Kevin to do something more for the Welsh producers. So if there are questions that any of your producers come back with, then please let me know, because I can pass those on to Kevin.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. We will do for sure.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. It's been good to see everyone again. And again, thank you to Kevin.
Okay, thank you really much. Thank you, Kevin.
Very much.
Bye.
Pleasure meeting you.
Bye.
Have a good day. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.